October 14, 1943, at 27,000 feet over Schweinfurt, Germany, Captain Don Blakeslee, commander of the 4th Fighter Group, leveled his P-47 Thunderbolt and scanned the sky ahead as 316 B-17 flying fortresses below him pushed toward ball bearing factories vital to German war production, while more than 300 Luftwaffe fighters swarmed the bombers like sharks attacking wounded prey. Blakeslee checked his fuel gauge and saw he had just 20 minutes left before he'd be forced to turn back. 20 minutes to protect bombers that still needed 3 hours to reach England, because the math was simple and merciless. The P-47, America's frontline fighter, had the range of a sports car, able to escort bombers only about 250 miles into Germany before abandoning them to their fate, leaving those that flew deeper completely unprotected. And by the end of the day, this single raid would cost 60 B-17s and more than 600 men. As Blakeslee reluctantly ordered his group to turn for home, leaving the bombers alone against nearly 200 German fighters, he transmitted words that would echo through Army Air Force's headquarters. "We need a fighter that can go all the way to Berlin and back. Until we get one, we're sending these bomber boys to die." What Blakeslee didn't know was that such a fighter already existed, not in a secret program or classified facility, but sitting ignored in a hangar at Wright Field, Ohio, an aircraft the Army Air Forces had officially rejected as inadequate. A plane declared inferior by testing and written off by bureaucracy, even though 5 months earlier, inside a small Rolls-Royce facility in England, a mechanic named Ronald Harker had committed what his superiors would later call gross insubordination by test flying an American fighter without authorization, recognizing potential trained pilots had missed, and writing a report that directly contradicted official evaluations, violating protocol, chain of command, and procedure, and making recommendations he technically had no authority to make. Yet Harker understood what pilots, procurement officers, and planners had overlooked, that the P-51 Mustang, dismissed as a mediocre low-altitude aircraft, could be transformed into the greatest air superiority fighter of World War II with one simple change: replace its American Allison engine with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin, an engine swap that would alter aviation history forever. The story of this unwanted fighter began 2 years earlier in 1941, when North American aviation received an urgent request from the British Purchasing Commission, as Britain, fighting Nazi Germany alone, desperately needed fighters because the Supermarine Spitfire couldn't be built fast enough and the Hurricane was already becoming obsolete, leading the British to ask North American to license produce the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, only for company president James Dutch Kindleberger to boldly claim they could design and build a better fighter from scratch in the same time, prompting the skeptical but desperate British to give North American 120 days, resulting in the NA-73, later named the Mustang, designed by Edgar Schmud's team with revolutionary features, including a laminar flow wing developed with NACA to reduce drag, a rear-mounted radiator using the Meredith effect to produce thrust instead of drag, and mathematically optimized fuselage and automotive-style production methods that enabled rapid manufacturing, with the prototype flying on October 26, 1940, just 117 days after design began and 3 days ahead of deadline. Early tests showed the Mustang was fast and agile at low altitude, reaching 380 miles per hour at 15,000 feet, with exceptional range thanks to large internal fuel capacity and drop tank capability, prompting immediate British orders and RAF service as the Mustang Mark I by mid-1941. But a fatal flaw soon emerged in the Allison V1710 engine, which performed well at low and medium altitudes, but collapsed above 15,000 feet due to its single-stage, single-speed supercharger, causing speed, climb rate, and maneuverability to fall apart at the 25,000-foot altitudes where modern air combat occurred, allowing German fighters to attack and escape at will, leading the RAF and U.S. Army Air Forces to relegate the Mustang to low-altitude reconnaissance and ground attack roles, officially declaring it unsuitable for escort or interceptor missions. And by mid-1942, the aircraft seemed destined for obscurity until April 30, 1943, when Ronald Harker made the unauthorized test flight that changed everything. Ronald Harker was not a fighter pilot. He was a 30-year-old Rolls-Royce test pilot and engine specialist based at the Hucknall facility in England, whose job was to evaluate engines in different aircraft and report technical findings to Rolls-Royce engineers. And he had no authority whatsoever to assess American fighters, recommend their use, or suggest modifications to foreign military aircraft. Yet on April 30th, 1943, while visiting RAF Duxford to observe Mustang Mk1 aircraft flying low-altitude tactical reconnaissance missions, a squadron commander casually remarked that the Mustang was brilliant below 15,000 feet and useless above it, then offered Harker a flight, likely expecting confirmation of what everyone already believed. Harker climbed into the cockpit for what should have been a routine familiarization flight, but once airborne, something immediately stood out. The airframe was exceptional, the aerodynamics were superb, the handling was smooth and precise, and everything about the aircraft felt right, except the engine. And as a Rolls-Royce engine expert, Harker instantly understood the implication, because he knew the Rolls-Royce Merlin intimately, the engine powering Spitfires, Hurricanes, Mosquitoes, and Lancasters, Britain's most successful aero engine, equipped with a two-stage, two-speed supercharger that maintained power well beyond 30,000 feet, producing around 1,420 horsepower at 25,000 feet, while the American Allison struggled to make barely 1,000 at the same altitude. As Harker flew the Mustang back to Duxford, a radical idea formed. What if the Mustang's extraordinary airframe were paired with the Merlin's high-altitude power, creating a fighter with low-altitude speed and range, combined with true high-altitude performance, the best of both worlds? And after landing, Harker committed an act of outright insubordination by writing a detailed report without authorization from Rolls-Royce management, RAF command, or American authorities, recommending the Mustang be re-engined with the Merlin, stating on May 3, 1943, that the Mustang airframe was superior to any fighter in production, and that its only real limitation was the Allison's altitude performance, arguing that fitting a Merlin would create a fighter exceeding the performance of any aircraft then operational. The report reached Air Vice Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, who immediately recognized its importance but faced a diplomatic minefield, since the Americans had already rejected the Mustang and Freeman had no authority over U.S. procurement. Yet he believed winning the war mattered more than protocol, and forwarded the report to the Ministry of Aircraft Production with a note calling it potentially the most important recommendation of the year, unaware that in the United States, Packard, Rolls-Royce's licensee, and a small group of engineers at Wright Field had already been quietly advocating the same idea, only to be blocked by procurement bureaucracy. Because officially the concept had been rejected for several logical reasons. National pride favored American engines, Merlin production was already stretched for British aircraft, re-engineering an existing design required time and resources, and the system had already committed to the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning. Admitting a mistake was something bureaucracy resisted. Yet by spring 1943, the bomber crisis was undeniable, with the 8th Air Force losing aircraft at unsustainable rates, since the P-47 lacked range and the P-38 suffered reliability problems in European conditions. And when Freeman suggested Merlin Mustang testing to the U.S. Air Forces, the response was dismissive, prompting Rolls-Royce to act independently by secretly removing the Allison from Mustang Mk1 AL975 and fitting a Merlin 61 without permission, a violation of every protocol imaginable, requiring months of engineering changes to mounts, cowling, cooling, propeller, and fuel systems, until the modified aircraft, designated Mustang MKX, flew on October 13, 1943, with Harker climbing to 25,000 feet and opening the throttle, discovering the aircraft reached 430 miles per hour, 70 miles per hour faster than the Allison version at that altitude, with spectacular climb, unchanged range, and flawless handling, leading him to write simply that it was the finest fighter he had ever flown, and superior to the Spitfire Mk9 above 20,000 feet, a conclusion quickly echoed by combat pilots like Squadron Leader Michael Robinson, who called it the long-range escort fighter they had been waiting for. Before we continue how this illegal modification reshaped the air war over Europe, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell if stories of forbidden innovation and bureaucratic rebellion keep you watching.
We bring you detailed, well-researched military history that reveals the human decisions behind technological breakthroughs, and your subscription helps us continue producing these in-depth documentaries. So now, let's see what happened when the Americans finally accepted what one mechanic's unauthorized test flight had already proven. By November 1943, the British Merlin Mustang test results could no longer be ignored, and performance data began reaching American commanders who immediately grasped the implications, including General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the Army Air Forces, who reviewed verified flight data showing speeds of over 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, a service ceiling of 41,000 feet, and a range exceeding 2,000 miles with drop tanks, not projections, but proven performance from a flying aircraft. And on November 8th, Arnold issued a direct order to North American Aviation to convert P-51s to the Merlin configuration and report results directly to his office, unaware that North American was already ahead of him. Because while Rolls-Royce had secretly carried out its illegal conversion in England, North American engineers were working with Packard, Rolls-Royce's American licensee, which was already producing Merlin engines in large numbers, and Edgar Schmood, the Mustang's chief designer, had always known the Allison was a compromise and had deliberately designed the airframe with enough internal volume to accept future engines. When Packard presented its Merlin V1650 in mid-1943, Schmood immediately began conversion work, and by November, 2 prototypes were flying, with company test pilot Robert Chilton confirming British results in late November, as Wright field engineers, who had once rejected the Mustang, now faced data they could no longer dismiss, showing the Merlin Mustang outperforming both the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning in speed, climb, and range, with a combat radius of 650 miles on internal fuel alone, and up to 800 miles with drop tanks, enough to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, leading Arnold to order full-scale production on December 20, 1943, ending Allison-powered variants and expanding production in California and Texas, with hundreds rolling off assembly lines by spring 1944. The first P-51B Mustangs reached England in December and were assigned to the 354th Fighter Group, whose pilots were initially skeptical of the smaller aircraft until their first combat mission proved otherwise, as the Mustang climbed faster than bombers, cruised efficiently above formations, and met German fighters with speed and aggression they hadn't faced before, exemplified by Lieutenant Charles "Chuck" Yeager's contemporaries like Lieutenant Charles Gum, who dove from 28,000 feet at over 500 miles per hour, destroyed 2 FW-190s, and returned with fuel to spare, reporting that the P-51 did everything the P-47 could do, but stayed with the bombers all the way home. And by early 1944, fighter groups across the 8th Air Force, including Don Blakeslee's 4th Fighter Group, were converting to Mustangs and discovering the same truth, as kill-to-loss ratios climbed to 11-to-1, far exceeding other American fighters, while German aces acknowledged the new aircraft's superiority in speed, climb, and range. And with the Mustang escorting bombers deep into Germany and back, daylight strategic bombing was transformed from a gamble with catastrophic losses into a sustainable campaign that would break the Luftwaffe and change the course of the air war forever. Bomber losses dropped sharply, and when American bombers struck Berlin for the first time in March 1944, losses remained under 4% despite facing the Luftwaffe's most experienced units, because Mustangs now escorted the formations for the entire mission, preventing the massed attacks that had previously devastated unescorted bombers. Yet the Mustang's impact went far beyond protection, as in January 1944, General James Doolittle, commanding the 8th Air Force, fundamentally changed fighter doctrine by ordering pilots to destroy the German Air Force wherever they found it, in the air or on the ground. And the Mustang's unprecedented range made this possible, allowing fighters to sweep ahead of bomber streams, attack German aircraft before they could assemble, break off to pursue individual enemies without fear of running out of fuel, and increasingly strafe German airfields, destroying fighters on the ground, a shift that quickly appeared in German documents, including a March 28th directive warning that long-range American fighters identified as P-51 Mustangs now accompanied bombers throughout their missions and were superior to Bf-109G and FW-190A fighters above 6,000 meters, advising pilots to avoid prolonged combat whenever possible. Advice that proved difficult to follow because the Mustang matched or exceeded German fighters in climbs, turns, and acceleration, while only slightly trailing in dives, making disengagement unreliable. and the statistics told the story, as bomber losses fell from 131 in March to 70 in April, 61 in May, and just 42 in June, directly correlating with the growing number of Mustang-equipped groups, while the Luftwaffe was bled dry in an attritional battle it could not win, as American industry produced aircraft faster than Germany could replace them, and American training pipelines replaced pilots faster than German veteran losses could be filled, culminating on D-Day in June 1944, when Allied air superiority was so overwhelming that the Luftwaffe managed only 319 sorties against more than 14,000 Allied missions, with Mustangs patrolling overhead, ensuring German fighters never reached the beaches in strength. And by late summer 1944, the Luftwaffe's daylight fighter force was effectively broken, still flying, but no longer able to defend cities, support ground forces, or sustain losses, while the once rejected Mustang became the preferred mount of America's top aces, including Major George Preddy with 26.83 victories, Major John Meyer with 24, Colonel Francis Gabreski adding 6.5 to his P-47 tally, and Captain Chuck Yeager scoring 11.5 kills, including 5 in a single day, October 12, 1944, as pilots praised not only its performance, but its superb visibility, light controls, stability as a gun platform, forgiving handling, and remarkable durability, with pilots like Major Preddy noting that while other fighters excelled in one area, the Mustang was competitive in all of them, allowing a skilled pilot to disengage and re-enter a fight on favorable terms. And veterans like Captain Donald Lopez recalling returning from missions with dozens of bullet holes, damaged controls, and an aircraft that still flew them home, proving that the fighter dismissed by bureaucracy had become the machine that won air superiority over Europe. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into how unauthorized innovation and human judgment reshaped the war, subscribe and share so you don't miss what came next, the final evolution of the Mustang and its ultimate legacy. The most important evolution of the Mustang came with the P-51D, which entered production in March 1944 and finally perfected the design, replacing the framed canopy with a full bubble canopy that gave pilots dramatically improved visibility, increasing armament to 6.50 caliber machine guns, upgrading the gun sight, and refining the aerodynamics to push top speed to roughly 447 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, making the D model the definitive Mustang variant, with 9,823 produced and equipping most 8th and 9th Air Force fighter groups by the fall of 1944, where it dominated European skies in the final months of the war. The last major variant, the P-51H, incorporated years of combat lessons by reducing weight through thinner wing skins and lighter structure, and installing the Packard Merlin V1650-9 engine, producing up to 1,900 horsepower with water injection, reaching nearly 487 miles per hour and becoming the fastest production Mustang. But it arrived too late, with production starting in February 1945 and only 555 built before the war ended, leaving the P-51D as the standard through victory, a fighter still capable of defeating any German aircraft, including the Me-262 jet, whose raw speed was offset by its vulnerability during takeoff and landing, a weakness Mustang pilots exploited by patrolling jet bases and destroying aircraft on the ground or in critical flight phases. The Mustang's dominance is reflected in the numbers, with total production reaching 15,575 aircraft across all variants, roughly matching the P-47 Thunderbolt, despite entering mass production 2 years later, and combat claims totaling nearly 9,000 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air and on the ground, more than any other American fighter type, while suffering a lower combat loss rate than its contemporaries, evidence not only of performance but of survivability, bringing pilots home despite heavy damage. After World War II, the Mustang continued to serve in Korea and with air forces around the world into the 1950s, 60s, and even the 1980s, and today more than 150 remain airworthy. But its true legacy lies in what it represented, the successful fusion of British and American engineering, the proof that long-range escort was essential to strategic bombing, and above all, the triumph of innovation over bureaucracy, because Ronald Harker's unauthorized test flight in April 1943 violated protocol, contradicted official evaluations, and could have ended his career.
Yet his insight helped create the fighter that won air superiority over Europe, proving that transformative ideas often come from those closest to the hardware rather than those highest in the hierarchy, that bureaucratic rejection does not equal technical failure, and that combining existing technologies in new ways can change history. The P-51 Mustang, designed in 120 days, rejected by procurement, rescued by one mechanic's illegal recommendation, became America's deadliest fighter, enabled daylight bombing, made D-Day possible, and turned the tide of the air war, a fact later summed up by Don Blakeslee, who once pleaded for a long-range escort and later led the 4th Fighter Group in Mustangs, saying that before the Mustang they were barely surviving missions, but once it arrived, everything changed, because it didn't just protect bombers, it hunted German fighters wherever they were and destroyed them. And in less than a year, from Harker's unauthorized flight to total domination of the skies, the rejected aircraft became a war-winning weapon, a reminder that sometimes breaking the rules in pursuit of truth is exactly what victory requires.